The following program is a production of KSPS Public Television and is made possible by the Friends of Seven. The date, May 22nd, 1993. After a long, dreadful winter, the fresh warmth of spring was finally in the air. It was an appropriate time to celebrate with open arms a new chapter in the ongoing story of one of Spokane's prized historical treasures. With its majestic Corinthian columns, its grand vaulted lobby, and 7 ornate fireplaces, it was clear the new home of Spokane's integrous architecture was a building from another time. And although this festive open house in the spring of '93 marked a brand new chapter in the continuing story of this historic landmark, it also at the same time was a fitting conclusion to a riveting story of preservation. From a noble public servant as a library and learning center to a neglected public disgrace, and finally back to a contemporary office building of regal splendor. This is the story of Spokane's Carnegie Library. To recount the history of Spokane's Carnegie Library, our story drifts back to the turn of the century. It was an era of great expansion for Spokane when civic leaders began realizing the community's potential as a metropolitan center. In this spirit, it was decided in 1901 that the growing city needed and deserved a public library. However, the problem was how to pay for it. One possible source was 2,000 miles away in New York City, home of a well-known philanthropist.
Andrew Carnegie donated money across the country for library facilities to be built in communities like Spokane. And there was a tremendous effort on the part of citizens in the community to get Mr. Carnegie interested in Spokane for this particular building.
Eventually, after several inquiries, the city's efforts paid off when Andrew Carnegie agreed to donate $75,000 to the project in 1903. With the funding now in hand and property near Brown's Addition donated by wealthy Spokaneite Amasa Campbell, the library project was well on its way. The next step was to come up with an appropriate design. Early in 1904, the city sponsored a design competition whereby drawings from members of Spokane's Society of Architects were sent to New York's Columbia University to be judged. In the end, the design submitted by the Spokane firm of Pruss and Zittel was selected.
In terms of design, it's a neoclassical building, typical of a lot of what was happening in the Beaux-Arts period at the turn of the century. But for Spokane, I think a very monumental building. It echoes a lot of what was happening along Riverside Avenue and kind of follows along that theme of the impressive civic buildings that were being built in that area.
Shortly after the selection of the design team, the bid of H.J. Skinner to build Spokane's new public library was accepted. On September 12, 1904, construction officially began with the laying of the cornerstone by then Spokane Mayor L.F. Boyd. The ceremony, including speeches from various dignitaries, was well received. However, there was some controversy surrounding the inscription on the cornerstone. Shortly before the big event, it was discovered that Amasa Campbell's name had been placed on the stone in front of Andrew Carnegie's. This seemed highly inappropriate to Mr. Campbell, who requested the Library Commission, in charge of the project, to change the inscription. They agreed. Yet to this day, over 9 decades later, the cornerstone's inscription still remains the same. 14 months after putting the infamous cornerstone in place, Spokane's new public library opened with a great deal of fanfare in November of 1905. It was a day worth celebrating not only for the citizens of Spokane who gained a new library, but particularly for those responsible for a project whose road to completion had been far from a smooth one. Due to various construction delays and revisions, the building had taken 7 months more to complete than originally scheduled. Furthermore, the project finished nearly $8,000 over budget. This was particularly embarrassing to the Library Commission, who suddenly found themselves without the funds necessary to furnish the building adequately. Consequently, the city had once again to appeal to the kindness of Andrew Carnegie for the additional funds. Initially, Carnegie was less than receptive to the city's request, asking in a tart note back to the mayor,
"Why was the library building not planned in accordance with the resources provided? It seems a strange way to carry on a project of this kind, to make plans so big that you can pay for nothing but the shell."
Fortunately, after further correspondence, Carnegie softened and agreed to increase his donation for the library from $75,000 to $85,000. It was far less than the $25,000 asked for, but the Library Commission, realizing they were in no position to negotiate, made do with some extensive modifications that were hardly noticed on opening day. Described as spacious and handsome by the citizens who saw her for the first time, Spokane's new public library displayed a selective mix of architectural styles and imagery. Some of its more distinctive features included a neoclassical columned entry, a vast Mediterranean-style lobby atrium, colorful mosaic tile flooring, marble stairways, huge wooden windows, 7 ornately different fireplaces, and even a water-powered elevator. It was plain to see that this newest addition to Carnegie's legacy had achieved the standards of architectural excellence established in the hundreds of other Carnegie-funded buildings around the country. However, those same architectural attributes that made it so beautiful also made the building less functional as a library. Because of its capacious design, coupled with added features of 7 fireplaces and 2 front stairways, the building, while grand, lacked valuable storage space, a problem that didn't take long to become apparent. After all, this was a library. And as the years passed by, the Carnegie's distinctive wide-open design eventually had to give way to various modifications and additions, all necessary to handle the library's ever-increasing volume of books and staff. Yet, despite its cramped conditions, Spokane's Carnegie Library served the community well for over 4 decades, until it was deemed too small and later closed in favor of a larger library facility in 1962. During its tenure as the city's main library, the Carnegie, despite its shortcomings, was often considered by both its staff and those who used it a very special place.
I was thrilled with this library because earlier in my childhood I discovered ancient Greece and those beautiful Corinthian columns out in front. I thought this was the most beautiful building. And the children's room had well, I suppose nowadays we would use the term ambiance, but to me it was almost a home library, crammed with books, a certain feeling of warmth. But I think I remember it as though the whole building was being held up by books.
Well, I remember working here from 1947 until we moved out to the Sears building downtown. And I remember coming here as a high school student, too, before I started to work, mostly with other debaters and speech people who always came down and used all the magazines in the periodical room. We thought it was, a terrific library. I remember the display cases on the balcony, the children's room that always had wonderful things in it. The reference counter was usually lined up 3 and 4 deep with people who'd come in of an evening to get reference service.
I remember when I came, it had been open quite a while. I came in 1946, was my first professional job. Came from the East, and then I stayed a year, but I came back because of all the extremely dedicated, wonderful people who were on the staff. It was just an atmosphere that you just don't get every place. That's the way I felt about it. So I left part of my heart here.
Following its closure as a library in the early 1960s, the story of the Carnegie took many different twists and turns as the old building played host to a number of different tenants. However, by 1983, the Carnegie was left vacant and on the road to decline. Eventually, as developers and their promises came and went, the property defaulted back to city ownership in 1990. Finally, after years of neglect and abuse, including an arson fire, the Carnegie was purchased in 1992 by Spokane's largest architectural firm. For $171,000, Integris Architecture had bought itself not only a significant landmark, but an intricate and costly restoration project as well. At the time, the firm's decision to take on such a project was based on two important factors.
Our internal thought process, I think, is driven by perhaps a couple of different issues. One is economics, and we say that we would like to own our own building rather than paying rent to somebody else, and that perhaps a historic structure allows us a better opportunity. There's another issue of trying to take a responsible role in retaining some of the character of the community. And we felt very strongly about that, that we are investing in retaining an important part of Spokane's heritage. And that is, we think, will be very rewarding in the long run. So that's very important to us.
One of the local organizations that was instrumental in bringing the Carnegie together with Integris was Spokane's Historical Preservation Office. Under the direction of Kit Garrett, the Preservation Office provided Integris with invaluable information and assistance. Much of the information provided dealt with the various tax incentives available to developers interested in restoring historical property. These special tax breaks are designed to make restoration projects like the Carnegie more attractive. However, there are strings attached, including certification on both the local and national historical registers.
By pursuing those types of designations, there are tax incentives that are available for property owners. With the National Register, there's a 20% investment tax credit for properties that are rehabilitated. And then with the Spokane Register, there's a program called Special Valuation, which in essence helps to delay property taxes on improvements to a property for a period of 10 years. There are very straightforward guidelines that have been developed by the National Park Service for renovation of historic buildings. And one of the things that we try and make clear to people is that if they want to take advantage of the tax incentives, then those guidelines tend to be more strict than what they would do on a normal basis. But in a sense, those tax incentives are there to help outweigh and offset those expenses that might be necessary.
There is quite a bureaucracy to go through, numbers of applications to submit. We're receiving excellent advice from Kit Garrett on the type of information that we need to include in our submittals. She's been very available to us as far as some of the design proposals that we're putting forward and helping us evaluate those from the historic perspective.
Once their restoration and design proposals satisfied the various requirements of both the local and national historic registers, Integris was ready to begin the Carnegie's much-needed facelift. A monumental task, considering years of decay had transformed this once proud home of books and students into a haven for vagrants and a flock of marauding pigeons. Yet, despite the despair, those close to the project still saw potential.
I've walked through an awful lot of buildings that have been strewn with pigeon droppings or even with piles of it, and remnants of mattresses and old clothing, and buildings that have been terribly vandalized. But there's always something there, and a lot of times a very special feeling, if it's only in seeing those original door frames and moldings, original hardwood floors, and just some of those things that, you know, when it's cleaned up and a lot of those cosmetic things are taken care of, you have a building that offers so much more than what we can get with new construction these days.
Well, you can see a lot of work. It's obvious there's work, but it's a challenge. It's just like any new building, and it just presents a different challenge is all.
When I first walked in, you could tell that the building had been sitting vacant for a long period of time. There was a real musty smell. There was an incredible amount of moisture. The woodwork, the plaster was starting to peel from the walls because of the expansion, the heat and the cooling of the building. There had been so many other uses of this building in the last 3 or 4 years that it was being used. Everybody that came in added walls, and they threw up partitions and doorways, and that was just real heartbreak to see that. So I saw there was a lot of potential in this building. It's absolutely beautiful, but there was a lot of work that had to be done.
There was indeed much to be done, which required the 2 men in charge of the project, Van Clark of Integris and Jim Crowley of Walker Construction, the general contractor, to hit the ground running in the fall of 1992.
My particular job is to see that the schedule is maintained, and to set up a schedule and make sure that the subs that need to get in here at a certain time, and it was really imperative that everybody did exactly what they were supposed to do when they were supposed to do it.
I have to deal with the changes that we make through the contractor and the cost implications of those changes and the time implications of some of them. And then when we have a problem that we've incurred that we didn't anticipate, which there's always that in a building of this nature, we've got to deal with that.
One of the first problems that required immediate attention was the building's lack of heat.
Since the building had been unheated for a long period of time, we really could not do anything except demolition until we got some serious heat into the building. We first started putting heat in the building with propane because it was taking a long time to get natural gas hooked up. That was really integral because one of the things that we had to do when we first came in here was scrape all of the paint and all of the plaster off the walls and off the ceilings. And the more we heated the building up, the more plaster that separated from the existing surfaces. So that told us right away that we were going to have to bring this temperature up to about 70 degrees for at least a couple of weeks before we could even complete some of our demolition.
Besides providing heat, another initial concern of the contractor involved protecting, during construction, all of the historic finishes in the building that needed to be maintained.
We have mosaic tile in the atrium. We had an incredible amount of traffic that was going to go over the surface of this mosaic tile, including heavy equipment. So we covered that with plywood. Also, the existing staircase has marble treads, and we knew that subcontractors, in order to get their work done, were going to be dragging materials and supplies and equipment up these stairs. So we had to protect them some way. So we designed an inverted set of stairs that fit over the top of this marble to protect that. Also, on a project like this, all of your materials, since the building is already built, all of the materials have to come in through either a doorway or a window. So on the outside of the building, we have terracotta windowsills, which are very, very soft, and you could break those and chip those really easily. So there was another area that we had to protect as well.
Once Jim was satisfied all the necessary precautions were in place, interior renovation of the Carnegie went into full swing. Meanwhile, outside, renovation of the building's exterior was also underway.
The exterior, we had to look at how we were going to be able to restore the outside without changing its appearance, because there are certain limitations on how you can clean the masonry, what you can do to the windows and the woodwork outside, the granite. So the outside has to be left as near as it originally was, and some of those things are difficult to do.
The restoration of buildings is pretty well generalized. There are certain products that you have to use for different, like the sandstone and brick. If it's a light colored brick, it has to be done different. It depends on the materials that are in the building, the products that you use. A solution that you put on the building, let it sit for a period of 3 to 5 minutes, or depending on how dirty it is. And then we use a high-pressure water machine to wash out the dirt. In this area here, we have the railroad tracks that was fairly close, so we have a lot of the soot from the old trains that used to go through here. And then it's just atmospheric dirt that penetrates the porous brick.
Fortunately, much of the Carnegie's exterior restoration was completed just before the start of the winter of '92, a winter that proved to be a harsh one. Yet while it was cold and nasty outside, it was warm and busy inside, where a myriad of restoration challenges were being dealt with. The most important of these included restoration of the building's ornate plasterwork, its huge wooden framed windows, and its colorful mosaic tile flooring. Proper restoration of these three high-profile areas could make or break the project. The first item on the list, the Carnegie's extensive plasterwork, demanded immediate attention.
Plaster was a real big problem because it had been in here for so many years with no moisture control, and the plaster was cracked all over the building. The windows are framed with plaster molding. The ceilings have plaster crown moldings, and there are ornamental plaster rosettes around. A lot of those had been destroyed or damaged, and we were able to get a plaster contractor who was experienced in restoration. So where it was damaged, we've made new plaster moldings and replaced them. They made a cast of the rosette and made new rosettes and replaced them. So in most instances, we've repaired or replaced all of the damaged plaster molding.
Another plaster item that required time and patience was the intricate color plaster wall located in the lobby. This expansive wall that greets visitors as they walk in was important to Integris because it would ultimately be the firm's signature wall.
It was just a process of how much color you add to the plaster and how you applied the plaster before we got to that. And we had to try different ways. The thing with this color is it fades close to 70%. So we'd put one on and we'd let it dry out, and we'd say, oh, that's way too light. Then we would add more color and try different various techniques on texture and how to try to mingle those colors together. And I don't know how many samples we made until we finally got it right.
The second high-profile item that presented a major restoration challenge involved the Carnegie's huge 6-foot windows.
With this many windows and the size of the windows, our energy consumption would be tremendous if we couldn't deal with the windows with insulated glass. From a historical standpoint, we could not replace the windows, but we could reglaze the windows, which we did. We had some problems with the restrictions of the National Park Service who regulate these features. We originally wanted to use what they call low E glass for one of the panes in the glass. But they wouldn't permit that. Some of the early low E glass was somewhat reflective outside. Buildings of this vintage did not have any type of glass in them that was reflective in nature. And I think they felt that the low E glass would still be somewhat reflective.
With that issue finally resolved, there was now the challenge of reglazing each window.
They originally had only single glass in them. And to put double glazing, you had to thicken the space of the window frame that receives the glass. And there was limited ways that they would permit us to stop in the glass. And what we were able to do was to remove the old glass and keep the interior as near as possible. We routed out the frames and enlarged them to receive the insulated glass. Then we refaced the outside with a completely new wood stop, which didn't change the exterior face of the building or the windows at all.
The final high-profile item that was dealt with late into the restoration project was the beautiful mosaic tile flooring gracing the lobby as well as the upstairs mezzanine.
Our intent at the very beginning was there were areas that were going to be seen and we needed to patch and repair those areas. And there is an area rug right in the center, right in front of the reception desk that we knew was going to be there. And so we decided that we would remove those mosaic tiles in that area and reuse that material in areas that would be seen. It took quite a few days to prep and remove those tiles, clean them up, and embed them in new locations, and try to match the existing patterns that they had too. And then after all was said and done, after everything was grouted, then they came in and the contractor proceeded to clean the mosaic floor on both levels.
As the blustery winter of '92 lingered on, the pace of activity within the Carnegie accelerated, particularly as the project's deadline of March 1st drew closer. With numerous contractors all trying to finish their work at the same time, it was up to the principals in charge to keep the restoration moving ahead smoothly.
It was a matter of dealing week by week on the schedule. And so, of course, there were some areas where somebody didn't have the right equipment, or the right equipment would show up and it was the wrong equipment. So we basically, you have to hash it out.
But what about the missing heating coil up on the 3rd floor?
Yeah, well, that isn't really necessarily, as far as getting this permanent heat, that isn't so much of a problem. Yeah, there is a problem with that coil, and I guess it's been shipped and it's due in there any day.
Everybody knew right from the very beginning how critical the schedule was. So everybody worked to that end, and everybody cooperated.
Ultimately, that cooperation would be critical because it was clear the Carnegie's rebirth involved more than just reclaiming the building's handsome historical features. It was also, with the addition of updated mechanical and electrical systems, a renovation project. The Carnegie was being converted from a tired old building into a new modern office building. The challenge for Integris was to balance these new needs of a modern facility while still maintaining the Carnegie's historic ambiance. To pull this off, Integris needed the help of all contractors involved.
Case in point, the electrical contractor came in here and he knew that putting a bunch of surface mold or wire mold on the faces of these walls with the switches and the boxes, the receptacles, surface mounted, would be atrocious. So they took it upon themselves. They literally saw cut into the existing masonry walls and bedded and buried all of their conduit and all of their wiring. That's something that wasn't required. However, they felt, as well as everybody else felt, that let's go this extra step. And there again, that's back to the attitude of let's do this right.
And right they did in many ways. As promised, the Carnegie opened for business the first week of March. Then, after completion of exterior finishes that had been delayed by the weather, Integris was ready to show off its new home in May. For the first time in over a decade, the Carnegie, now a nationally registered landmark, opened its doors to the public.
Come on in. I remember coming in here as a kid when it was a library. Is that right? Yeah. Did you ever go up to the children's library on the 2nd floor? I don't recall, but I'm sure I did, yeah. I think you did. All right. Thank you very much.
With its architectural elegance restored, the Carnegie, as it did at the turn of the century, dazzled the hundreds who came to inspect her. For some, the moment was nostalgic, while for others it was a brand new experience. But for all, it was evident the rebirth of this old friend, known as Spokane's Carnegie Library, had indeed been done right.
I can't step back and take a look and think of anything that I would do differently today. There were so many things that changed throughout the project that it really enhanced it, and we took care of things immediately. And because of that, when we were done, we knew that it was exactly the way it should be. And it gave everybody a really good feeling.
It's a little bit difficult to see the effort that went into this thing from what you're looking at now. What you see is, I think, a real result of a lot of real creative effort, not only from the design, but the contractors' efforts, too.
It's a treasure to our community, and it's important that we preserve all old structures. Every time I think of most of our buildings, some buildings deserve to be torn down, but to see this building and the fireplaces and the furniture and an architectural firm in here, it is what a city should do.
Oh, I think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful that they have restored some of the original architectural features, the detail, but I think what thrills me the most is that they have restored its pride and made it a building of usefulness again.